Eli, I'll hand it off to you. You can get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks to Virginia Tech for giving us the opportunity to speak with all of you today. We're definitely very excited to show you all a little bit more about Critic, our AI-driven peer grading and assessment platform that professors like Laura Reed and David Wang, who we'll be talking with later today, have been using in their classes to engage their students, to teach them how to provide critical thinking through evaluation, and how to get involved with one another and create formative learning opportunities for their students. That being said, today's agenda, we'll keep it pretty brief, and we want to make sure it's high level for you. So I'll give you a really quick introduction on the platform, what we do, and how we accomplish it. John will then give us sort of a really high level, quick demo about how the product works, just so you can be more familiar with the different stages associated. I'll then talk a little bit more about the impact of peer assessment, so what current, past, and present research is saying about peer assessment, student perception, and how it can be leveraged in your classes. And then we'll have a Q&A session with Laura and Dave, who are two professors teaching different courses and have used Critic in the past term. So that being said, what is Critic? What are we trying to do with our product, and what are we trying to do with peer assessment? We want to make learning engaging, effective, and efficient. And so, through our AI algorithm and helping students, assess one another through rubrics and different scores, we basically distribute fair and accurate assessments by harnessing the collective intelligence to simplify workflows and reduce turnaround time on feedback. All of you have now all adapted to the online learning format, and it's taken a lot of effort to sort of cultivate this really engaging environment for students. And so, especially in classes like Laura's or very large classes, 200-300 plus students, or even classes as small as 10 to 20 students, Critic has been very effective in using peer assessment to engage students in a variety of classes. And so, Critic is founded by Dr. Mohsen Shahini, who's here with us today, who co-founded Top Hat 10 years ago, one of the really impactful ed tech company up here in Toronto as well. And just over the last year, with the switch to online learning because of COVID-19, we've had 40,000 plus students come and use our platform in the last year, since January 2020. We've grown 10 times in terms of usage. And we have over 100 different universities and colleges using Critic, such as Princeton, Columbia, Cornell, and of course, Virginia Tech. We already gave our brief intros, but just so you have a little bit more info, as I mentioned, Dr. Mohsen Shahini got his PhD in engineering and knows a little bit about AI, and he definitely brought it to our company. And of course, he co-founded Top Hat, which has kept him in the edtech space for a while. I myself am very ingrained in the experiential learning research that's going on up here in Canada. I focus more on business students and making business education more impactful. I myself have worked with hundreds of professors using Critic individually, and I've learned a lot from computer science to engineering to history to biology, and the tons of different courses that use our platform. And John, who will be giving our product demo in a minute, he's our VP of Business Development here, and he's had 5+ years of experience back at Top Hat as well. He knows quite a bit about edtech and what makes edtech popular and useful for students, and he holds an MBA in Tech and Innovation from Tel Aviv. That being said, I'll hand it off to John for him to share his screen and go through the Critic product.
Thank you, sir. Perfect. So let me just share my screen. And I think the theme of these first two sections are, as Eli mentioned, brief, high level. Obviously, we're not going to really be able to dive too deep into everything. I want to keep this within 10, 12 minutes so we can get to the conversation with Laura and Dave. But I think it's important that you guys understand where we're coming from, what our vision is, and really how we've been able to help professors and students. So as Eli mentioned, our focus really is on peer assessment and ultimately designing higher order thinking activities through peer assessment to get students to sort of think outside the box and develop some of those soft skills that a lot of times they don't necessarily get access to. And sort of in turn, it also allows professors to save a lot of time on grading, admin, leaving feedback every single week for every single one of their students, and really take a step back and focus on the students who need their help the most, which is extremely important, obviously, in this online setting. So with that being said, what you guys are looking at here is the student's perspective. So what students would see when they're using Critic. And as mentioned, these peer assessment activities have three unique phases. I'm going to walk you through each one as a student would see them. So the first phase of this type of activity would be the create phase. So what happens here is students would jump in, they would see that there's an objective, instructions, and you could see here there's a rubric set up. So these rubrics are totally customizable. And obviously a rubric in a computer science course is going to be completely different to a business case study course. So we really tried to focus on making this as easy and intuitive as possible for all professors to customize a rubric that fits their needs. The reason that we use rubric-based assessments for all of our Critic activities is that it really sets the expectation very clearly for students up front as to like, this is what you guys should be focusing on to sort of have the highest quality assignment. But then I would say more importantly, when it comes to peer assessment, it allows for more enriched evaluations, because the research does show, and I'm sure this won't be surprising, that when rubrics are involved in peer assessment activities, the quality of the evaluations is significantly higher. So as a student, I'll look over all of this and I scroll down and I simply leave my response. So I can either type in a response if it's like a written reflection or something like that, or I can attach a file if it's a STEM-based course. And so this is really sort of up to the professor as to how the activity is set up. Students can also upload videos. Really, we accept any file, and the professor can limit that or sort of open it up or disable it if they want. So you can see here, we really tried to focus on ease of use and a nice clean UI. One of our professors told me the other day that good technology doesn't fix bad pedagogy, and so ultimately, we're just trying to use technology to facilitate the human side of learning. And so hopefully you can see that here. So there's going to be a due date for this create phase, and then the due date will pass. There is a late submission option, so students will be able to submit late, and it'll be marked late, and they'll still be included in the rest of the process. And I will say, unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the time to sort of make this as interactive as I would like in terms of going back and forth with questions, but we're always happy to meet with anyone after the session, and we can do a one-on-one meeting and really learn about your teaching objectives even further. But for sake of time, I'll just keep moving forward. After the create phase, the activity will automatically move to the evaluate phase. And so you can see this activity card here would be an example of an activity in the evaluate phase. And so during this phase, again, students are given the objective, instructions, and the rubric. But now instead of submitting something, they're given a few of their peers' creations to evaluate. So they don't know who they're evaluating. It's double blind. And the number of evaluations is set by the professor. The sweet spot, what the research shows and what we found is that having students evaluate 3 creations of their peers ultimately gives the greatest results overall. So you can see here, I'm Blake in this example, and I am given an anonymous creation, and I evaluate it based on the criteria of the rubric that the professor set up. I also have to leave a written evaluation. So there's a qualitative and quantitative aspect of this stage. One thing to note here is if I just tried to write as a student, great job, to submit, I'm prompted to leave a longer comment. That's sort of the first way that we're really pushing students to think outside the comfort zone and really leave a strong and meaningful comment that's both critical and motivational. So I'll go in and leave a comment, save and submit, and move on to my next one. Now, the really key part about this phase, if you guys haven't used or explored peer assessment before, is that the research shows that doing this actually will benefit Blake potentially even more than the student that he's evaluating. And the reason for that is Blake is getting exposure all of a sudden to 3, 4, 5 different approaches, different ways of looking at an assignment, very diverse aspects that he might not have considered before. And also, as he's evaluating and providing comments based on the rubric, that's really helping him retain the knowledge at a deeper level. Again, reverting back to those higher order thinking skills we're looking to provide and help nourish in terms of the students' learning. So that's the evaluate phase. And then there will be a due date. Again, you can see up top here, the students are prompted and they know exactly when it's due. They'll be notified by email or by text message if they so choose. And then we'll go into the third and final stage, which is called the feedback stage. Now, this is a really unique stage to Critic, because if you have used peer assessment before, you probably are used to those first two stages, right? Students submit something, they're given a few of their peers to evaluate. What this third stage does is it actually enables students to provide feedback back to their peer evaluators. So they're given all of the written comments that were left on their work, and they can actually provide feedback and close that loop to the students totally anonymously that evaluated them. We kind of call that stage feedback on feedback. You can see here, again, anonymously, I'm given all these comments, all this feedback from peers. At this point, I don't know the grade I got. I don't know who the student is or what he or she gave me according to the rubric. I just see this written comment. And we've developed this feedback scale where students will respond to their peer evaluators on a scale of 1 to 4 on how motivational and how critical these comments were. So this is a good example of a student who left a really solid piece of feedback. It has some areas for improvement. It has some positive reinforcement. It's very specific, so it ties to criteria of the rubric. So Blake here would say this is motivational and very helpful. I can also leave an optional comment back to my peer evaluator, really to close the loop. So again, as the feedback on feedback stage, what I'm doing here is leaving feedback back to my peer evaluators, again, really helping them to understand what it takes to be a strong evaluator, a strong critical thinker. So after I leave all of my feedback on the feedback, I'm given my first grade here. So I'm immediately given a score, and this is the creation score. So what the creation score is the weighted average of all the peers that evaluated my work. Now, this is where kind of the technology starts to come into play. This is where professors start to kind of get wide-eyed, right? Where what I can actually do here is hover over all of the students who evaluated this particular assignment, and they'll have a grading power. Now, what's a grading power, you ask? I'll scroll down to another student who has a different grading power. It's ultimately the impact that each student's scoring will have on a peer's final grade. So scroll back up to the creation score. This is a weighted average based on all of the different grading powers of these students. So ultimately, basically TA level graders will have a very high impact on this grade that you're seeing. Students who aren't necessarily putting in the effort or the time and maybe leaving all 4s, all 100%, they'll actually be penalized a little bit, and I'll talk about that after. And they'll also not really have an impact at all on this grade. So that's where the calibration comes into play, where we really start seeing accurate grades. So at this point, as a student, when I'm given my creation score, I can dispute it if I choose to. So if I want, I can dispute to the instructor, and definitely going to open that up to David and Laura later, but we do see disputes being used in only 3% of activities. So it's obviously a great feature to keep professors in the loop, to make sure that you guys have full visibility and control. However, I believe that it's not being used because these grades actually are quite accurate, and because students aren't used to getting 5 pieces of feedback every single week or every other week on all of their work. And they also, what we found is they enjoy getting feedback, not just from the professors, not sort of from that higher level authority figure, but from each other, and trends start to emerge. So that's what that all looks like. I know I was just talking about the grading power and sort of our algorithm and the weighted average. So I wanted to jump over quickly to a professor's perspective and show you how we set grading power as a baseline, because we obviously have to sort of set it from somewhere, from someplace. And so we do it in the form of what's called a calibration activity. And so I'm now jumped over into the professor's view, and I'm going to scroll down to a calibration activity here. So what a calibration activity does, right at the beginning of the term, professor will take 3 submissions that their students submitted, maybe a really, really A+ high quality one, an okay one, and a lower quality one. They'll grade them according to the rubric, just the same as they normally would a standard assessment. So if I jump into the calibration activity, there's only one stage. The professor grades these just 3 assignments. Even someone like Laura, who has 800 students, she just does it 3 times. And then we give those same students in the course the 3 assignments to evaluate. And what our system does then is, and we'll stick to Blake as the example, we actually calibrate how closely in line did Blake grade to the professor. So this one here, Jane, is sort of an extreme example. If Jane graded exactly 100% in line with the professor, she would actually have like the highest possible grading power right from the start as a virtuoso, compared to someone like Blake, who was pretty good. You know, he has a grading power that's at a scholar level, and then maybe going down to someone like John, who is a little bit off, and so he only has a grading power of 4. So the sort of lowest one would obviously be someone like Maria, who didn't even do it or didn't put in any effort. She has a grading power of just 1. So this will change throughout the term, but this is how we set it as a baseline. And again, happy to cover this in more detail at a later point. And then the other thing I just wanted to cover is what things look like from the professor's perspective. So we've gone through those same phases: create, evaluate, feedback. Now I just want to look at this grading stage, which is exclusive to the professors. And this is where, again, you'll have that full visibility and control to look into the data, use some filtering, and try to sort of pick out students that really struggled or needed your help. And so you can filter and only find the students who disputed the score. You can search for particular students, and you can actually filter by scoring. So I can actually find the lowest, let's say 5 or 10 submissions as rated by their peers. So Maria is a good example here. I'm kind of picking on Maria this afternoon, but she disputed. You could see that there's a red hand here, and she got a 60% on her assignment as rated by her peers. I can jump in, I can look at her creation, I can look at all of the students who evaluated Maria's creation, and I can also see actually how Maria responded to those evaluations before she knew her grade, which is always interesting. So again, with the grading power, I can hover over Jane, and as a professor, I can know, you know what, Jane historically has shown a high ability to evaluate at a TA level, so maybe I'll really take hers more into account. And ultimately, at that point, I can edit the score. I can also manage that dispute, and it will be either resolved or there will be no change, and Maria will be notified of what you decided. You can also comment directly to Maria. That'll be a private comment at any point to any of your students. You can also comment on the evaluation, which is unique, because if someone like Jane is doing an amazing job, you can actually just pop a comment to her and let her know, you know, with some positive reinforcement, how well she's doing. So really good visibility. And ultimately, you can see how much time this will actually save you, because you won't have to look into all of the students every single week. You can really just pinpoint and pick out the ones that really need your help the most. I think that's what teaching is all about, being a coach, being a mentor. And that's really what we're seeing here. And then just to wrap up, one of the other things that we'll have here for the students for each activity is not just a creation score. So back to Blake here. Here's his creation score. This is what he got as rated by his peers. He'll also have an evaluation score. So for each activity, he'll be given a score, which is a combination of how accurately he graded his peers compared to the other peers who graded that assignment, and also the quality of his written evaluation. So in this example, Blake evaluated Jane. He was pretty closely in line with how the other students evaluated Jane. So he'll get an 80% grading score. And he also left comments that's, you know, Jane felt very motivational and quite helpful. So we'll take an aggregate and ultimately Blake will have an evaluation score. So you can see students are really incentivized and rewarded for taking the time and effort to provide meaningful evaluations of each other. I'll just wrap up quickly with saying we also do have a discussions tab where students can take polls, interact with each other. This is sort of an add-on feature. And the other thing I'll say, and Eli will touch more on this, is there are multiple different types of these activities that you can administer. An individual activity, just one-on-one, students submit, they'll evaluate other students. There is group activities, and we'll get into that a bit later. This has become really, really popular for facilitating group work. There's two types of group activities. One where students will work as a group, submit something as a group, and then evaluate other groups individually. And then there's a group members feature. This is brand new, just really based on professors' feedback. Everyone wanted this, and we built it in, where group members can actually evaluate each other's contribution as it pertains to the actual work that was conducted together. Calibration, we already went over, so I'm not going to cover that. I will say we do integrate with LMSs, Canvas, D2L, Blackboard, and that's been super popular. And I'm going to stop talking now because my voice is getting sore. I'm used to answering a lot of questions, and I'm going to pass it over to Eli. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated for that really quick sort of high-level demo. As John mentioned, if anyone's interested in having a more personalized, tailored session to see how Critic could fit directly in your course, John would be more than happy to set you up in a meeting with someone from our team to go over some of that. And so before we bring Laura and Dave on to talk a little bit about their use, just wanted to quickly review some of the research that's out there that has been there for some time, but also new research that's showing the improvement of the incorporation of peer assessment. And so first and foremost, peer assessment in higher education have shown positive effects on students' writing skills. When they're, especially through our platform, when they're submitting work and they're reading and evaluating the work of others, they're forced and exposed to how other people are responding to the same prompts. And it'll often lead them to think a little bit more about their own work, refine their writing skills if it's incorporated in the rubric, and more importantly, just get practice with writing, receiving feedback, and interacting with one another. If you've ever used peer review before through Canvas or Blackboard through sort of your LMS, you'll notice that it's very bare bones, and it's more so just putting students together to evaluate. Unfortunately, that's not really pedagogically driven, right? For peer reviews to be accurate, it needs to have a minimum of at least 3 evaluations assigned to each student or on each piece of work. And so Critic definitely, we did our research to sort of make this as effective and as accurate as possible. And so the very minimum you can set in Critic is at least 3 evaluations. And so we want to follow as many pedagogical practices as we can. And something that's more related to students' perception of peer assessment is that students are more likely to engage and improve with student feedback as opposed to teacher feedback. Certain research has mentioned that teacher feedback can often be authoritative and not timely, so students don't feel like they have the opportunity to negotiate and improve and resubmit upon that. And also psychologically, getting feedback from from your colleagues, people in the same situation as you, responding to the same type of work, has been proven to make students more engaged and interactive with the feedback. And on this graph on the right, we were looking at research on calibrated peer review. There's a lot of, like the LMS peer review that exists, it doesn't really offer the opportunity to calibrate with your grading. And so in this particular article, after students had done one peer review assessment, then done a calibrated peer review, the overwhelming majority was that they felt that they learned topics better, improved their writing skills, and more importantly, they're learning how to defend an argument, to evaluate, and to critique effectively. And also just seeing examples of how other people approach the same problem will definitely help them continue to develop their own work and their work for future assignments. And so that's sort of what drives us to build this peer assessment platform. It's something that's been researched since the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's getting more out there, especially as we pivot towards online learning and making learning more engaging and formative. And so with that being said, I'd love to ask Laura and Dave if they want to maybe turn on their cameras and on their mics. I'd love to ask them a few questions. So I guess we'll start with Dave for now. Dave, thanks for joining. So quick introduction on him. He teaches at the University of Waterloo. The course that he used Critic for was first year engineering engineering professionalism, and you use Critic for sort of weekly group activities and individual activities for them to engage more with the content. So first and foremost, teaching 3 different sections of 100 plus students in sort of a new format that you were using, why did you want to use Critic, and why did you design it the way that you did to use it in that way?
Well, to be quite blunt, the pandemic forced us to look at this. We had a lack of TA resources. We wanted to do more group work. But with 377 students, and we had, I believe, 15 written submissions, that's over like 5,500 assessments, and I only had 2 TAs. So that, without Critic and pure assessment, we just could not have given them any sort of assessment. And so that was really what motivated us. But once we ran it, we did student surveys. The response was phenomenal. And in terms of the disputes, out of all of those assignments, we only had 0.6% disputes. And it was a huge time saver. There was just no way I could have, with 2 TAs, been able to give that kind of feedback to the students. And the fact that there was only 0.6% disputes meant that the students felt that the assessment was fair. And between 2/3 and 80% of all the feedback we got on all aspects of Critic was very, very positive.
I mean, that's great, especially you mentioned pivoting because of the pandemic and introducing new things to still make the content of your course engaging and effective for students. I'm glad it was such a success. And you mentioned...
I should also mention, I also used it in a graduate course, which is more theoretical, and they had to actually submit PDF submissions of proofs and things like that. So it worked well in the grad course as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. You used completely different use cases for your first time in different ways, and I'm glad that it worked out for both classes. And in terms of that student feedback that you mentioned, do you think even if the pandemic ended and you return face-to-face, do you think you continue to use Critic maybe in a different way or in the same way to have that same level of engagement?
Oh, absolutely in the same way. I think it was very, very beneficial to the students. And you mentioned writing, communication skills, and teamwork. Being able to give constructive feedback is excellent for teamwork. So I just saw so many benefits. And I teach engineering professionalism, and these are all skills, soft skills that they need to take into the workplace. So I thought it was just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and courses like yours are becoming more popular as the day goes on. Engineers need to have that opportunity to develop these communication skills and interact with one another. I wish that we had our intro group evaluation feature built when you use Critic. I think that's something that when you comes time for you to teach again, I imagine that you'll be using that feature quite extensively to gain insight into how people are working together.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So if anyone has any questions for Dave, please contact it or message it in the chat or unmute your mic. Like I said, we're lucky to have 2 professors using Critic, and I want to make sure that we talk to Laura as well, who used Critic a bit differently. So Laura is teaching, if you thought David Wang teaching 370 students was a lot, Laura's times 2. Laura taught over 800 students in computer science, and she has experience as a programmer and used it a bit differently. So Laura, first question, maybe it's related to the pandemic. Why did you want to use Critic in your class of 800 for the activities that you did?
Well, I have exactly the same reasons as Dave. We were I don't even know if it was because of the pandemic, but Ontario keeps tightening the resources, and we just didn't have enough TAs. Every year we're struggling to get enough TAs to do the marking. So it was a purely selfish reason that I did it. And then another thing I have found is, I don't know if you guys have done this, but sometimes I have a TA who isn't that great a marker. So they mark the one student and the student's assignment is all wrong. But if I give them 50 students to mark, they're all wrong. Whereas if you have 5 people marking you, the majority of those 5 are going to mark it correctly. Whereas if it's just one person who didn't quite know what they were doing, they get, a little mixed up. But anyways, so I decided to try it because of finances and issues like that. And then I would tell you that my experience has been, I am so glad I did it, just because, it's computer science for non-science students. So they're social science students and art students, and they create a website. And what they have to do is evaluate, the way we market is they evaluate each other's websites. So it's fantastic in that they all come in thinking, I'm going to get 95 in this course. And they think they're or that they're owed 95. And I think when they see other students work, they think, oh man, that student's way better than me, or oh man, that student really has no clue what they're doing. So I think it enlightened them, like it really made them think about what they were doing. I think the process of doing it was so important. And also I'm glad that part of their grade wasn't just on could they build a website, but could they evaluate other people's websites, that how well did they mark. It was just like my reason of going into it was finances, and in the end, really the reason I love it has nothing to do with the finances. I think it just worked out so much. I think my students got way more out of it because they did the peer marking. And I had the very last quiz, I put a question just to see if that was true or not, or if it's just my feeling. And over 50% said they're glad they did the peer marking, and 40% said, well, I just do whatever the prof tells me to do. And then, but I would, only 9% said they didn't like it. So I'm like, that's 90% of the students were happy with it. So I was more than happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really great feedback from you, especially your experience and understanding what works and what doesn't for the class. And so I wonder, if Critic didn't exist, there was no peer assessment platform, what opportunity would you give them, to do activities like this? Would you have your TAs mark all 800 website submissions, or to be more summative, like exams, multiple choice, or things like that?
I'm not sure what we would have done. Like, somehow our grad secretary always finds bodies, but that's the issue, is they're not always strong markers. But if you've taken the course and you have to mark 5 other students and 5 people are marking you, I think you get better marking than having a TA mark it who's just trying to do it, and they have to do 50, so it's overwhelming. Whereas if you just have to mark 5, they put a lot of thought and care into it. So I think we got a much better quality of marking. That was my experience. I'm not sure if that was David's, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just to answer your question, like we would have probably just did spot marking, have them submit assignments, but just mark every third one or something like that, because it was just too overwhelming. We didn't have the resources. And we actually did a survey asking them, do you prefer, we had like overwhelming 2/3 of the students weren't even neutral. They liked the fact that they saw their peers and they got to evaluate their peers. And, in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, you basically need a higher level of understanding to be able to analyze and to critique. So in my grad course, it was very interesting. We could nail down who the strong students were within a couple of assignments based on looking at how they were evaluating. So it was very, very good. For small classes, for large classes, it would be difficult to do that. But for small classes, you can actually almost predict what they're going to get based on their evaluations, because you do need higher understanding to be able to mark well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I think even some of the classes that I've worked with that focus, in completely different areas like sociology and health issues, and where smaller classes have more of an opportunity to sort of, for the professor to intervene and sort of facilitate, it definitely does work well. And then obviously we notice classes like Laura's where you just don't have the resources to create a meaningful formative experience without incorporating peer assessment in the way that you did. And so
they were nervous too at the beginning. Like I had at least 3 students email me when I said we're going to try this, saying, I don't think this is going to be good. I think the TA should do the marking. And then I had, I still remember I had one girl she's in China because she couldn't come back to Canada because of the pandemic. And she said, oh my gosh, design, we were doing website design. She said, design is so different here. And it's so interesting to see how other people would design things. And I don't think she would have had that feeling if she hadn't had to mark the 5 other students that she had to mark. So she really made me feel like it was rewarding for her, even though her view of design was different. It really made her think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something we're noticing as well, especially at the University of Buffalo that has a partnership with students in Singapore in classes there, is that certain students in different parts of the world don't have that opportunity where their classes really engage with that kind of formative process where they're evaluating one another. And it's really interesting to see them talk about it after. And Eric Leonard has a question, said, how many papers does each student assess? Laura has mentioned 5. Is that a fairly typical number? So I think Laura and Dave, if you guys both want to answer that question as it related to your specific assignments.
So 5, I think, is the best number, depending on the size of the assignment. But I would lower it down to 3. I asked the students what their workload was. So occasionally I'd reduce it down to 3, but no less than 3. I don't even think Critic allows you to go below 3. Right. So 3 to 5 is the sweet spot. So you do have to manage their workload a little bit. You can't, have a huge assignment that takes hours and hours to assess, because they do have to assess 5. But what you'll find is the shorter assignments will be much better done, and you just have to kind of design your assignments a little bit more carefully, I think.
And I think they get better. Like they take a longer time marking the first one, but by the time they're at the 5th one, they're in a groove and they know what they're doing. My issue with having 3 was that I did have one girl where in a class of 800, you do have people who just don't bother to do their marking. They don't care. And I did have one girl where if I hadn't had 5, 2 of the people didn't bother to do hers. So she only had 3 people marking her. So I felt like 5 was the right number. And it ended up taking them each about, I asked one girl, it took her about 20 minutes to mark each one. So it was between 1 to 2 hours of marking for all 5, which I felt seemed reasonable.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, a few more questions based on those answers. Thanks, guys, for that. Do their assessments factor into their course grade? So as Laura and Dave mentioned, the whole critic process produces one final grade. So you can actually set the weights of how does their actual grade of their assignment factor in, how does the grade of their evaluations factor in, and their participation. So typically professors will give 50% to the work that they submit. They'll give 40% to the evaluation process and 10% for participation. So that distribution encompasses all of the different aspects in critic and rewards the students for the various stages of work that they're doing. So it does factor into their course grade. Typically, professors will assign 10 to 15% of the final grade, a little bit more sometimes for that. And Dan asks, was this integrated into the LMS or were students going to a separate platform? So that first part of that question, right now it exists as a separate platform. We just launched Gradebook and GradeSync integration with Canvas in the hopes that we can continue to sort of integrate our systems a bit better, depending on the IT departments of the different universities. And did the students pay for the service or did the university? It's both. And in Laura and Dave's case, it is a fee that the students do pay that we negotiate with the professor based on how many students and what you're using the platform for. But also there are some universities, and maybe Dave, we can talk a little bit about a grant that we're working on where the university covers the costs for critic and students can buy into or opt into that process. And so, Dave, I'm not sure if you wanted to chat a little bit about the grant that you're helping us write or working with, but
yeah, we're putting a grant proposal in to basically evaluate the effectiveness of critic. We did some student polls, but that's really their perception. So yeah, we're going to take a look at, the reduction of workload for the instructors. I know it was huge for me. I would have been overwhelmed without critic. The other thing too is the students don't really bulk at it. It's a reasonable cost. It's depending on the number of students, but our students, I believe, paid $25. And I had to put together a little video explaining about peer assessment and the value of it in their education. And what I really emphasize is that they get the $25. If we had to hire enough TAs to give them the same amount of feedback, their tuition would go up. There's just no doubt about it. So, you do have to explain to the students the value add in their terms of their education. And out of 477 students, I got no pushback. Or 377, sorry.
After 200, it's all the same. But no, it's a very good point. And as a recent graduate myself, when we're conditioned as students to seeing high prices or prices for anything that we have to pay for, especially textbooks that like $200-300 that we don't really get that much value out of, we're conditioned to think that way. And so, David, that's a great point you made about sort of setting the expectations of what they're going to get out of it and the value they'll receive. And for them to get that much feedback,
what it would cost to get TAs or different people involved to produce that same level. So
I would say too, when Dave said it made less work for him, I would say your first term of using it, it does make a little bit of work because you have to figure everything out and kind of problem solve. And I'm sure even though Eli has a nice brown head of hair, I'm sure I gave him many gray hairs because I was like, how do I do this? How do I do that? So it's a little bit of a figuring out curve, but this term I feel so much better. And every time, even though I had to figure stuff out, I still felt it was worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And so what Laura mentioned is a very important point. And so it's not just me. I'm one little piece or a cog in the Critic customer support sort of team. On the Critic website, within the Critic app, students and professors can click on the little chat icon in the bottom right. We have very, very responsive service team from Monday to Friday, sort of 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. They'll get back to you within 5 minutes or so, regardless if you're a student or professor. We also have a team that manages it over the weekend. And of course, I'll work with all the professors one-on-one to tailor the product use of Critic to their class.
And thanks, Eli, for sharing. I also want to say that we have a lot of students who contact the live support, and some of them are, we really support them when they have like a learning disability or something like that. We are very happy to give them the comfort. Sometimes some students panicked regarding the deadline, and we are here to give them also like some support to encourage them to still do their work and then do a good job for you guys.
And I would say too, like a lot of the issues were just me the platform was new for me. So if you make your rubric, if you do a good job on making your rubric, it makes everything so much better. But I kind of had to learn how to do things. So it's not at all that it was hard for the students to use. It was just, I had always used Excel for my grade sheet. So I had to rethink things and word it so that the students would think about it carefully, because I wasn't having a meeting with them like I would with TAs to explain the rubric. So little nuances that I had to figure out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With anything new, there is a learning curve that comes with it. And I'm glad, Laura, after using it with 800 students and the constant communication we've had, that you're using it again and you feel much better going into the term, knowing how to use it based on your last experience. So I think, thank you very much, Dave, Laura, and everyone else who attended. I think this was a great session and a great way for us to talk a little bit more about Critic. And I think your experience in using it definitely made some of the attendees feel or get some more information. So with that, I'm not sure, John, if you had anything else to say, but we'd be more than happy to meet with you one-on-one. Tomorrow, we are in our booth as well, the same Zoom link, so feel free to drop by and talk to one of our representatives there. And I want to thank all of you very much for attending, for asking questions and being engaged. And I hope the rest of you all have a great day, and thanks again for chatting with us about Critic.